What's good, everyone? Today it is Wednesday, November 16th, 2023. Right now, you're listening to the That's Textbook Sports podcast. Make sure y'all go to the description. The links to my social media will be in the description. And then, of course, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for this podcast. Those of y'all who are my subscribers, my followers on social media who watch these podcasts, I truly appreciate it. I truly appreciate y'all and y'all's participation. And right now for this podcast, going to be talking about the Texas A&M head coaching vacancy, talking a little bit about the NFL football, some of the key matchups, upcoming games. Got a huge game tonight. Cincinnati Bengals, Baltimore Ravens, must win, absolute must win for the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, going to be talking a little bit about college football matchups, the landscape of the college football playoffs as it is right now. What is the most likely outcome? What is each team's path to success? All of that combined. You don't want to miss this podcast, so make sure y'all turn on post notifications and the podcast that I have coming up later in the season. Some teams it's looking not likely like they're going to be making the playoffs, so you're looking forward to draft season. Going to be doing a lot of prospect rankings, draft profiles, scouting reports, film studies. You don't want to miss any of that. So make sure you hit the bell, turn on post notifications. Again, check out the description, all the links to my social media, that is my Spotify, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all is going to be linked into there. Appreciate y'all, and let's get into this video, because as y'all know, that's textbook. So Jimbo Fisher, formerly the head coach for the Texas A&M Aggies, he has been fired. The Texas A&M athletic director themselves, they decide they want to go into a different direction considering the state of the program. And in my opinion, that was the right decision. Listen, Jimbo Fisher had a lot to work with. It's A&M, lots of talk about their NIL collective and that sort of deal. But then also look into it about recruiting. They have the highest rated recruiting class of all time with a 333.13 rating. Now that was in 22. Absolutely shattered records, multiple five stars. So they shouldn't be a team that's just barely getting bowl eligible or being at the current state of the program that they are right now, considering their recruiting class. They've also have their NIL collective, which every school does, and the transfer portal. So it was time to get rid of Jimbo Fisher. Now, what's the next step for the Texas A&M Aggies? Lots of talk about Dan Lanning, the current head coach at Oregon. I don't see that happening. Listen, Oregon is also a top-tier program. They're a really good football program. When they have the right head coach, that is Dan Lanning. I don't see him going anywhere. But in my opinion, I think it's Lance Leopold. Now, before I talk more about Lance Leopold, there's also some suggestions that it should be Dan Campbell, who's the head coach of the Detroit Lions. I absolutely don't see that happening. I don't think Dan Campbell would want to coach at the collegiate level. And you consider how the current state of the collegiate level in recruiting as it is to the NFL is almost kind of the same. You have these NIL collectives. You're having to deal with the transfer portal. It's a hectic mess. So I don't see Dan Campbell leaving what he built with the Detroit Lions. How the Detroit Lions were. They were a terrible franchise. Now Dan Campbell has revitalized that franchise. I don't see him leaving. I think the A-plus home run hire for Texas A&M Aggies is the current head coach at the University of Kansas. It's Lance Leopold. You look at with Lance Leopold in the recruiting class that they have so far in 2024, ranked 46th overall. Lance Leopold was hired in 2021. During that season, they went 2-10, but then you saw steady progress. The year after that, they go 6-7. Now they're 7-3. They're a program that's knocked off Oklahoma, and they're doing it with their starting quarterback out. And like I said, Texas A&M with their NIL collective and the type of recruits that they have right now, you got to find someone, an A-plus home run hire to retain that recruiting class, because we know about the transfer portal. In my opinion, Lance Leipold, home run, absolute, knock it out the park hire. So let me know, my audience, everyone listening to this podcast, if you disagree, let me know who you think should be the next head coach of the Texas A&M Aggies? In the comments, of course, I appreciate it. Chicago Bears quarterback Justin Fields is full go. He's been practicing the last couple of weeks. Head coach Matt Eberflus says it was a progress of retaining his grip strength with the broken thumb. So, with there being 7 games left to the Chicago Bears schedule, is there still time for Justin Fields to correct things? Or is it already too late? Are the Bears, no matter what happens and what Justin Fields does the rest of the season, are they going to take one of the top quarterbacks in this upcoming draft? Well, let's look at the Chicago Bears' upcoming schedule right now. This week, they have a tough game against the Detroit Lions. Then they have the Minnesota Vikings, followed by the Detroit Lions again. A very tough Cleveland Browns defense. Arizona Cardinals, Falcons, and then they finish off the season in Green Bay. Looking at that schedule, it's really tough, but there's a lot of key games and key opportunities. Like, you faced the Lions twice. We know about the Detroit Lions and how they've been playing. But the Minnesota Vikings, they've been playing really good as of late, and Josh Dobbs is exceeding expectations. So that'll be another tough game. So, and then the Cleveland Browns defense. So that's 4 games right there, where if Justin Fields, if he wins all 4 of those games, I think it raises some eyebrows. But I think at this point in time, with the Carolina Panthers being so bad, and the chances of the Chicago Bears having the first overall pick with either theirs or the Carolina Panthers, or having a high enough draft selection to take a quarterback, I don't know if there's much that Justin Fields can do. Now, if they win, if they go 7-0 and they're in some kind of crazy scenario where they might make the playoffs, I think you have to consider it. And then that Justin Fields working out for the Chicago Bears puts them in such a better situation. Obviously, this is his 3rd year in the league. Now, with the first round draft pick, they obviously get that 5th-year option, or the team can exercise it. So you've got, in theory, 2 years for Justin Fields' contract. Now, if you build up the roster, let's say you go out and you draft a Marvin Harrison Jr., and then you go get either Olu Fashanu, the left tackle, or an edge rusher, or you use your own pick to trade back, gain more assets for the next year in case Justin Fields isn't the guy. Yes, Caleb Williams and Drake May, they are can't-miss prospects, but Justin Fields working out and taking another year to build up this overall team. You have Montez Sweat, and the defensive line, offensive line has been playing a lot better. If those positions are playing, you got those down packed, and they're playing really well, that's about 60 to 75% of the battle for an NFL franchise. Now the rest is skill players, obviously identifying the starting quarterback. So is there opportunities for Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears? Yes. And they better hope so, because Justin Fields panning out helps them in the long run. But if I was running the Chicago Bears and I had the chance to get Drake May or Caleb Williams, I would say I'm about 75% close of taking one of those 2. So, of course, my audience, I love when y'all participate into my podcast. I truly appreciate it. Let me know in the comments section. Is there enough time for Justin Fields to make things right and prove that he is the franchise guy? Or are you taking one of the top prospects in the upcoming draft? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate it. This wide receiver that no one is talking about is rapidly climbing up NFL draft boards, and he is none other than LSU standout Malik Nabers. You look at Malik Nabers' stats so far this season, in just 10 games, he has 72 receptions. He's tied for his career high. 1,284 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, a 17.8 average. So we can see that he is a deep threat, and he also has that yard after a catch ability. And he's crossed the 100-yard receiving mark in 7 of his last 8 games for LSU. I always, when talking about prospects and how well they're going to do in the NFL and transition into the NFL, I like to watch the tape and the film of their Alabama game. And you look at the stats that he had for that Alabama game. 10 receptions, 171 yards, 1 touchdown, a 17.1 average. Now that is up against a uber talented Alabama secondary featuring Kool-Aid McKinstry, the best cornerback in college football and in the upcoming NFL draft, Terrion Arnold, who is improving, Caleb Downs, star freshman. You just see the talent that he has, the yard after catch ability. A lot of people are giving him the comparison to DJ Moore, and you see that because he's got that stout build. I think when watching him play, when watching his highlights, when studying him, I think he reminds me a lot of that receiver in Philadelphia, absolutely being a superstar, A.J. Brown. He reminds me a lot of A.J. Brown and the type of intangibles that he displays. Late hands for a wide receiver. Late hands for a wide receiver is so important because a lot of the times when you put those hands out, the DBs are taught to play through the hands, knock the ball out. Late hands, gotta have him. And then the route running skills, the yard after a catch. He's just so talented. We need to pay more attention to him. I know that there's Marvin Harrison Jr. He's gotten the respect, well deserved. Keon Kilman, well deserved too. But we've also got to give some respect to Malik Neighbors. Now to talk a little bit more about the upcoming NFL matchups, going to be starting out with the Thursday night football game tonight. Cincinnati Bengals, Baltimore Ravens. Ravens coming off of that. Well, actually, both teams coming off of a depressing loss. Ravens had that game. They messed around. They found out. Now they're sitting at 7-3. And then for the Cincinnati Bengals, lots of key injuries, and then T. Higgins not being available tonight. Like I mentioned in my most recent podcast, T. Higgins, I hope you all understood the importance of Higgins with this Bengals offense. Like when Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd are all on the same field, they have the best receiving corps in the NFL, and they're a prolific offense. But without T. Higgins, there goes those jump ball opportunities. Obviously, he's a terrific wide receiver, fantastic route runner. This offense is a lot different with Higgins. They're another level or two up. So it's going to be a tough game for the Cincinnati Bengals. But I wholeheartedly believe that Tyler Boyd is going to bounce back. He's not going to have those key drops. Obviously, that key drop against the Houston Texans really set them back. They most likely win that game. He catches the football. It's hard for me to pick or decide who's going to win this football game because I feel like with the Baltimore Ravens that they can beat anyone, but then they can also get beaten by anyone. I think you could say that for a lot of teams in the AFC. I just don't know. And what version of the Baltimore Ravens are we going to get? We know the Baltimore Ravens, they're number one or really elite in scoring defense. They rely on their defense. They rely on the run game. And I hate to sound redundant, but at some point in time, maybe Zay Flowers is going to have to take that step up. We know rookies are a late trajectory or a late trend when they get things going. Maybe Odell is going to have to bring back some juice from the past. But what else are they going to find in the receiving game? Like we saw with the Steelers game, Lamar Jackson, he was on point. Ball is perfectly placed where it needs to be. Receivers are dropping passes. Maybe receivers aren't getting open, but something's going on. So the Baltimore Ravens, it feels like they're right there, but they're also missing something. If I were to pick a game, I'm going to go with the Baltimore Ravens. I think this is a game that the Cincinnati Bengals, they absolutely have to win, so they're going to treat this like a playoff-like game. Obviously, it's the AFC North. It's going to be tough, physical. But I'm going to stick with the Baltimore Ravens right here. Now, what are the keys to the game? For the Baltimore Ravens, it's obviously running the football. And what else can we find offensively in the passing game that can work? Then for the Cincinnati Bengals, how much can you protect Joe Burrow? That's always been the story about this Cincinnati Bengals team. And what type of production are they going to get from their tight ends? Because with T. Higgins not being there, someone else is obviously going to have to step up. The run game has been not great. It's not ideal for the Cincinnati Bengals, and it's obviously not their identity. So for the tight ends, against the game I think it was against the Buffalo Bills, the tight ends had 100 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Maybe they find Irwin, or maybe it's Lacivas, or maybe it's the tight ends that also steps up for them. But overall, in the end, I like the Baltimore Ravens in this one. And then, of course, another huge matchup that everyone is just so desired to watch. It's that game on Monday night in Arrowhead. Philadelphia Eagles, both teams coming off a bye. How? Because the Eagles have a lot of injuries. Obviously, Nakobe Dean, he's been put on IR, so he's going to miss 4 weeks. What's it like with the Eagles secondary? Because I think that's a real weakness in this team. Like the Eagles, of course, they're stacked. We know that they have the offensive line, the defensive line, all of that sort of deal. But the secondary is really worrisome for me. How can Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs attack this secondary? Because Kelsey hasn't really got things going. Don't know what's the issue or what's the problem there. What are they going to have to figure out offensively? Last year, when I was talking about this Kansas City Chiefs team, it was, okay, well, who else is going to step up? Juju Smith-Schuster was there. Okay, he doesn't move the needle, but he's someone that helps them in the receiving game. Maybe this is the game for Rashee Rice up against a poor Eagles secondary. Maybe this is the game where Kelsey starts to get going. For the Philadelphia Eagles to get some kind of revenge, because we know these two teams played in the Super Bowl, it's going to be how healthy is Jalen Hurts. Obviously, we know that the plan for them is not to run him as much. How healthy is he? How healthy is that Eagles team in general? And can they find some things to work for them in the run game? Because the run game, maybe the expectations were too high for the Philadelphia Eagles within the run game, but it just hasn't looked like how we would have expected it or how it did last year. All in all, these games on Monday night that are on Thanksgiving week are always fun and entertaining. We all know the classic Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Rams, the best regular season football game of all time. Maybe it's the best football game of all time in general. Gonna be a fun matchup. Obviously, eyes are gonna be glued to the TV. Talking about big games on the college football front, the only ranked top 15 ranked game upcoming is Washington, Oregon State. Maybe that one gets interesting. Then also a couple others that might get into upset alert just because next week we have a lot of rivalry games. Obviously, the huge one, the game, Ohio State, Michigan. In these types of weeks where you're playing opponents you might overlook them, it's always interesting and entertaining. Get some really close scares like Ohio State, Maryland last year, and of course in 2018 with Dwayne Haskins and that type of comeback. And then, of course, last year you had Michigan, Illinois get into a really close game. Always key to watch out for. Michigan's got Maryland this week. Next week I think that's when the playoff picture gets a little bit clearer. Now, it's still a little murky in the sense that, okay, you're going to have Alabama. Alabama plays Auburn. Now, Auburn is not as good as Alabama. I'm not saying Auburn is going to beat Alabama, but that could get interesting because it's the Iron Bowl. And in those types of rivalries, anything is possible, in the famous words of Kevin Garnett. So, I believe after this week, it's still going to be the same. I mean, maybe Louisville is right there vying for a college football playoff spot. And to stick with the ACC, as I mentioned in the last podcast and on social media, make sure you go check me out there. Links will be in the description. But anyways, there's a good possibility that Florida State maybe possibly wins out. They win the ACC and they don't get in because a lot of these other teams have a lot better resumes or it just looks a lot prettier. For the example, let's just say Alabama. Like if Alabama beats Georgia, they're most definitely going into the college football playoff. It's just determining, are they the number 2? Are they the new number 1? What are they ranked? And then it's still most likely that Georgia gets in, right? A couple of ranked wins. The win against Ole Miss, the win against Missouri. Obviously, the committee values Missouri really highly. So there's that possibility. For the Big Ten, it's just going to be one of those teams. Like, the loser of the game is not getting into the college football playoff. Huge stakes. And then, of course, you have the conference championship. The conference championship, the committee, they do value. Now, looking at the Big 12, obviously, just Texas. But then for the Pac 12, Like we know it's gonna be one of Oregon, Washington. So in all that chaos, how are these things gonna get sorted out? Obviously, winner of the Pac-12 gets in. One from the Big Ten. Maybe Alabama nudges out Texas, or does Texas nudge out Alabama? Because the committee has kept it consistent with the fact that in the head-to-head, Texas beat Alabama, so Texas is ranked ahead of Alabama. But then who is Texas going to face in the Big 12 championship? Right? I mean, it's not going they're not going to be it's not going to be as fancy as like Alabama going and beating Georgia. Right? So that's really where it gets interesting and where we could see chaos, lots of confusion. Obviously, people always get upset about rankings of any sorts. It feels like there's never really one clear ranking that everyone is satisfied with. Everyone believes someone should be ranked higher or lower. If I were to just say, like right now off the top of my head, who's making the college football playoff? Going in the scenario of what we would expect, which is Georgia beating Alabama. It's going to be Georgia there. Winner of the Big Ten will be ranked second. 3, winner of the Pac-12. Then maybe Florida State. Now, if that does flip, if Alabama beats Georgia, okay, it's one of Alabama and Georgia are going to be in there, a Big Ten team, and then most likely a Pac-12 team. If Alabama beats Georgia, I know I've talked about it a lot, that really hurts Texas because now it feels like, and that's where we get a lot of confusion because Texas beat Alabama in the head-to-head. Both, assuming Texas wins the Big 12 championship, only have one loss. But now we get into the nitty-gritty. We're talking about strength of schedule, eye test. Now we're compiling all these other things. Trends, how Alabama has looked the past couple of games. Texas and their health, how they've looked at the past couple of games. That's where we get a lot of chaos and confusion. All great for us to sit back and observe. And that's how I see these college football playoffs panning out right now. So it's getting a little bit clearer as we speak. Here's the last thing I'll say about college football. In sports, like the NBA is a long season, MLB is a long season. Over the past couple of years, the NFL has gone to be a long season. It's always about how great you look later on as opposed to early on. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And as that pertains to college football, I say this because Georgia and Alabama, as of late, have looked like some of the best teams in college football. Alabama and Jalen Milroe, since that Texas game, have taken their game to another level. Now, for Jalen Milroe up against that Georgia defense, and the reputation that Georgia defense has, to see the type of growth and how he's playing so far, can that translate up against the Georgia defense and a lot more tougher defenses? Because if it does, then I believe that he is one of the most, he has really untapped potential. And the potential is, I don't want to say anything too crazy, but there's just something to be had with his type of potential that I think some aren't seeing yet. Obviously, fantastic athlete. Terrific deep ball. He's a talented prospect and player. Intermediate and short throws. Needs to work on a little bit. But I think that there's something special brewing that I don't know if some of the Alabama coaches, like the QB coaches, or maybe even their offensive coordinator, have found out yet. But as it pertains to Alabama and Georgia, I think that SEC championship game just might be the national champion. But the way that these two teams are playing as of late, both complementary football, both looking really scary, setting themselves apart. I know Alabama is ranked 8th, but when you watch the games, you can tell that there's a clear difference between Alabama and Georgia and a lot of these other teams. Like I said, that game, that SEC championship game, just might be the national championship game. Said it in 2021 when they met in the SEC championship game in Atlanta. Turns out that was the matchup in the national championship. Of course, although a different outcome. Now, this last segment is what I like to call the knockout. And no, it's not going to be any kind of physical knockout or anything like that. But it's a dedication to Draymond Green and his headlock over Rudy Gobert. Draymond Green, a lot of people out there, first I'll say this. Draymond Green puts Rudy Gobert, Rudy Gobert is tall. Like, Draymond is tall too. Draymond, I believe, is anywhere from 6'8 to 6'9. But Rudy Gobert, a 7-footer, Draymond is putting him in a headlock. Draymond gets suspended for 5 games. Obviously, anyone watching basketball, Noma Sports, has heard about the reputation of Draymond Green. A lot of people are putting the hoop mix out there of Draymond Green in WWE, saying that he should be a WWE wrestler. And listen, that might be something that he does later on when he's done with basketball. We see him on WWE. He might take it a little bit too much more seriously, though. But no, all jokes aside, the Draymond Green suspended for 5 games. I think that's just. Like, when you put someone in a headlock and when there's mixtapes that last anywhere from a minute to a minute and a half of you hitting other players, you're stomping on Sabonis's head, you're kicking other people in the groin, you're elbowing people. For a minute and a half, that cannot be any kind of coincidence that stuff happens. Now, are there some times where Draymond's not at fault and maybe Sabonis was holding down his leg? Yeah, there's some times where that's the case, but that's also sometimes. Key word there. Was this suspension right? 5 games, yeah, I think it's right. Now, maybe they might throw in some fine. Obviously, Draymond Green, he's written a couple of checks, so he knows a thing or two about sending checks to the NBA. But last little segment there. Appreciate y'all listening to this podcast, tuning in, participating. I appreciate it. Be sure to go check out the description because the links to my social media will be in the description. I'm talking about the links to my Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. I'll be trying to post more on TikTok. Haven't posted as much. Make sure you go check that out. Follow me there. I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Like this podcast, subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend. Let's get this podcast out there. And I bet if I were to tell the NFL that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce were on this podcast, it would get tons of likes, it would get tons of views, it would get tons of shares. So let's do that. Like this video, subscribe, share, be a friend, tell a friend. I appreciate y'all, all my listeners. Have a fantastic day out there. Achieve your life goals. Every day is a fantastic day in a breath of fresh air. It's a blessing. God bless y'all. Take care. And until next time,